Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, that oblique injury I talked about last week isn't going away, so basically I am just hollowed out by pain a lot of the time, especially when I try to sleep. But I keep working, reading more books, and recording new shows. So here we are. And one of my best friends called out of the blue on Sunday, and we got to shoot the breeze for a while. It was a good conversation, and it's a substitute for being out in New York or somewhere and just bumping into someone and you know, having those little chance encounters. But yes, he had to go out of his way and deliberately call. Still, it was good to be surprised by that instead of getting a text asking if it would be okay to call. Can we schedule something and blah, blah, blah. What I'm saying is spontaneity is kind of a nice thing here in the stasis of pandemia. Anyway, what we talked about, one of the many things we talked about was the difference between an avocation and a vocation, and why we're happy that both of us have things in our lives that are neither our jobs nor, you know, all the consumption of media and everything else that people do while they're recovering from their jobs. And for me, it's this show plus, to a lesser extent, the zine, and there's running, but that's something I can't do while I'm injured like this. Maybe learning to draw, that's sort of how we entered this sort of conversation. And my pal has guitar for his thing, and we're around the same age, both near 50 or over in my case. And we just talked about how neat it is to have that sort of thing without the youthful aspiration of somehow making it a job. Like, there's no, I'll make this podcast and eventually I'll get picked up and become, you know, this media figure or something. I'm 50 years old. I do this out of love. I'm not going to get discovered. And he feels the same way about the guitar. He'll get better at it, but it's not and then I'll form a band, then I'll get a label. And, you know, it's a different thing at this age. And avocation just sounds better than hobby. So I'm going to go with that in the future. But anyway, that call came right after I finished recording this episode's conversation. Otherwise, there was an outside chance I'd have gotten the new show up on a Sunday, just because this week is going to be crazy busy with all sorts of stuff I can't tell you anything about, even if you wouldn't be bored by this stuff. So anyway, let's talk about the show. My guest this time is Kate Maruyama. She was on a couple of years ago and then on last May for a COVID check-in. Kate has a great and creepy new novella out. It's called Family Solstice, and it's published by Omnium Gatherum. There'll be a link to that in the show notes for this. I want to warn you, we don't talk too much about Family Solstice itself during the conversation, and that was partly my doing, because it's got so many neat twists in it, and there's so much of the atmosphere and tone that you just have to sort of experience. I didn't want either of us to blab too much about them and kind of ruin it for somebody who's going to read the book, but you should go read it. I'll tell you this much, because it comes up in the first maybe 2 or 3 pages. New England family that goes way back in American history, lives in this wonderful house, older house, like turn of the century. But the youngest daughter, who's narrating, keeps alluding to some sort of ritual that she's training for, something that her older siblings have gone through already. And since the first chapter is called Summer and the book is called Family Solstice, you can intuit some of the general shape of where this story's heading. Now, in Family Solstice, Kate does a wonderful job of weaving the family's peculiarities in with the day-to-day of being a teen. It's set in the 1970s, which we do talk about a little bit. But, you know, she gets at the normal family dynamics and then the weirdnesses tied into this particular family. And she evokes the way the way traditions can take over one's life, and how we may be part of a debt we don't even know anything about. And while carrying those themes, she also keeps the tension incredibly high throughout. I'm pretty sure that, like me, once you start Family Solstice, you will not put it down. It's 55, 60 pages. You will be compelled pretty much from page one. The novella is also a sort of Valentine to the great old house that Kate grew up in with her parents, Joe and Kit Reed. But like I say, we don't talk too directly about the book, and you'll see. Meanwhile, here's Kate's bio. It's from the flap copy of Family Solstice. Kate Maruyama's first novel was Harrogate. Her short works have appeared in Asimov's, Controlled Burn, and Stoneboat, and on Salon, Duende, Entropy, The Rumpus, and other journals, as well as in numerous anthologies, including Winter Horror Days and Halloween Carnival 3. Kate edited Nicole Sconier's speculative short fiction collection Escape from Beckyville, Tales of Race, Hair, and Rage, and she's been a jury chair for the Bram Stoker Awards and was twice a juror for the Shirley Jackson Awards. She is on the Diverse Works Inclusion Committee for the HWA. She teaches at Antioch University, Los Angeles, in the BA program, as well as for inspiration2publication.com. The 2 is the number 2, and Los Angeles writing classes. She writes, teaches, cooks, and eats in Los Angeles, where she lives with her family. And now, the 2021 Virtual Memories conversation with Kate Maruyama. Last time we talked was May 2020. We did a COVID check-in, and you were, and I quote, at least according to my notes, self-shaming into finishing a novella.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I'm guessing Family Solstice was it. Tell me about it.
It worked
and tell
out.
me about the self-shaming process. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that I teach novel class, and I had just stopped writing at the beginning of the pandemic. Everything became overwhelming. Helping the kids through it, sort of managing. My daughter stopped having a senior year, then didn't have a graduation, and wondering what the kids were going to do in college the next year, and everything just stopped. But my novel class, who I was enthusiastically encouraging, continued to write. And so, yeah, I definitely had to shame myself. If they could bring me about 40 pages every 8 weeks, then I should probably make some progress. And fortunately, I had this novella that was about 3/4 done. I hadn't gotten to an ending. I hadn't done any sort of rewriting. It was just a draft. But that was something it was easy to sink into because I already knew what it was supposed to look like, and I could fix it. Yeah.
Gotcha. I wasn't sure if it was something that originated solely during pandemia or something that predated it for the most part.
Yeah, no, I wish. I've only been able to sort of generate short stories during the pandemic, and I've only just started writing in the present. There's this big discussion, are we all going to be stuck in 2019 forever in what we write? And I had a short story that I didn't know how it was going to come out. And it worked out because it seemed to solve all its problems. It was about gentrification in the restaurant industry in downtown LA, but it suddenly became much more purposeful when it started talking about lockdown and how that was affecting small businesses in LA. So that's my first present day story.
I was going to say, we'll get back to Family Solstice, but can you talk a little about that, about the, how this whole situation, as I call it, with capital T, W, and S, how it informs fiction?
Yeah, it's very interesting. A lot of people have been talking about it. Ellen Datlow had said that she would want contemporary stories because, we are all dealing with this. But I think we're all still processing what this new reality means, how it changes everything. And I think up until November, December, there was a whole lot of just uncertainty about the future. And so even dwelling there mentally just wasn't a super healthy thing to do. I know some writers who've just dived in and are doing great. And I know others who are blissfully spending their time in the very far future or the very distant past. But yeah, the present it's a real thing to think about. And I've been doing I've been doing a bunch of short stories set in sort of a Los Angeles with a slight supernatural edge to it. So the one that's about the downtown restaurants is actually about the dragons, the native dragons that keep them running. And this was the first one to sort of step forward. So I'm interested to see where the next one will go.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we talked in May, and that reality was very different than this reality.
I know, it's
we were
crazy,
still in
right?
that panic mode. Well, I mean, I've talked about it in recent months. At that point, I did like 60 of those check-in episodes in 65 days.
Wow.
And I look now, I'm like, how the fuck did I do that? I don't understand. Panic is what drove us. But, that energy and that total uncertainty, now things are different, I guess, in that sense of it becoming the day-to-day, where before we were still, I don't even want to say optimistic. We just had no idea what, the next week or so was going to bring.
Well, and people were panicking and making many, many loaves of bread or a lot of jam, because it's a very primal thing to want to stock the larder when things are uncertain. And I think we are in our way adjusting now. And I'm guessing 4 months from now will be a very different reality as well.
Yeah. I will say, we're not going to meet at ReaderCon this summer either.
I know.
I know. We were optimistic. Well, we left it open-ended last time we talked in 2020, but based on everything I know, which gets a little beyond what the general public knows, we're not getting together for a while. But
yeah, it's going to be, I mean, I think I'll feel more comfortable, especially with this new strain, and there are different people who are getting vaccinated and not. And you also don't know if you're vaccinated, if you're still carrying. So the idea that I could be a risk to someone else terrifies me. I mean, after I get vaccinated, I'm still waiting.
Yeah, it's well, again, I wonder, A, you being a writer, B, you existing in a continuum of other writers, how this stuff, changes or affects you. But when we talk about setting things in the before time, Family Solstice, you went back to the 70s for this novella. So tell us about the novella. I never got to visit your parents' house, which is, it seems, the lead character in the story. But tell me where the novella came from, and some of the storytelling decisions, like setting it in the 70s, approximating the age of the lead character.
Well, it's funny. So it's a hard story to talk about without spoiling it. But,
I know. So I'm leaving it to you instead of me.
Yeah. There was a massive source of destruction in my parents' house just as it was about to sell. And it was very devastating to me personally, because it was 2 months after my mom had died, and it sort of echoed grief in a much bigger way, because this was a house that I'd grown up in since the age of 4, and all of my memories were there, and to see photos of that destruction, which I'm not going to specify, was really devastating emotionally. And I had tried sort of to cope with it, as writers do, through writing a ghost story toward it, writing a family story toward it, and none of it was really happening, so I put it aside. But then there were 2 editors who were putting together a proposal for a winter solstice anthology that actually never happened. And I just sort of thought of a family, and I thought of a ritual that would happen at winter solstice, and then I set it in the house. And I was actually able to use that destruction to a narrative end within the story itself. And it just sort of rose up from there. And initially, I set it in the 70s just because that was sort of actually, that's just where Shay ended up. And actually, if I were to do the math, she's probably older than me. It's just that contextually, that seemed to be a good time to set it. And it was, I had no idea where the story was going because I knew there was something in the basement and I created this ritual around it. And this all happens early in the book. But I didn't know what was in the basement for the longest time. And then that piece came in and sort of rose up. And that was... It rose up. It's a question of heredity, and in a way, the gentler side, not the gentler, more insidious side of white supremacy, which is people not really understanding that everything they've inherited and everything their family about has actually come on the backs of others over generations, and this theme definitely played out during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations and became more important to me as I rewrote the novel. And that's sort of how it came about.
Yeah. It's something I wonder, and it's not a critique in any way. It's just something I've always pondered with any form of story like this one. How tough is it to actually reveal what the thing is when you build it up as long as you do? You know, how challenging or how much trepidation do you have of what you actually reveal when the reveal comes?
Do you mean sort of thinking up what it will be, or revealing
and
it?
how to depict it and how to live up to the ominous mood that it all evokes?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that there would be something about the family. I didn't know, the larger themes that it would encompass, but mostly I think a lot of it is sort of trying to avoid what we've seen before.
Yeah.
So how messed up can you make it? I mean, I made the family culture pretty involved and messed up. And so it was already headed that way. But, thinking it up, it just sort of followed and got twisted. Yeah. And, I kind of went down the basement stairs with her. And so what was revealed, was a revelation to myself as well. I don't think that really answers your question, but that's where it came from.
No, it does. It's, again, not specific to Family Solstice, but yeah, it's storytelling in general. When you're working on something like this, there's that sense of, I've got everybody stringing along. Now I actually have to reveal whatever the thing is. Partly this is because there's something in my attic that has been up there for a couple of weeks, and it's not skittering. It's moving things. I can hear stuff that sounds like the ice maker in the freezer where ice cubes are dropping. So it's clearly moving something around up there. And I don't know what it is. I've gone up with bait traps. We leave the light on in the attic overnight now because that seems to keep it at bay. And I'm not even making this up. And this is just a house that was built in the late 60s. It doesn't have all the history of the great house and Family Solstice. But yeah, reading your novella last Sunday, I'm like, well, that would explain maybe what's upstairs, but I'm sure not going to go up and find out. So.
We felt a very large animal had moved into our attic, and it was like there was this dragging and thumping, and it got more and more nightmarish. And it turned out that it was a rat, which we got out with bait traps, but it had found, I had made a Halloween tree gluing Skittles to a tree with my daughter, and it was dragging them and this giant pot around the attic. So it may be smaller than what you think it is.
I'm hoping, because I when I went up to put the bait traps up there was enough of I hope nothing comes running out at me. Partly I had Shallow Grave, the Danny Boyle movie, where I was afraid I was going to find Christopher Eccleston living up there. But
he is terrifying.
The nose especially would have just been awful. But I didn't see anyone up there. And here we actually have seasons, so it's winter, it's cold. Whatever is outside is trying to nest somewhere upstairs in the attic. So your novel scared me on last Sunday when I was reading it, thinking I'm looking up, hoping, well, whatever it is, it's certainly not burrowing, ready to fall through the ceiling onto either of us while we're sleeping. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's my big fear of the reveal. So, I'm hoping whatever's up there just isn't that significant, but,
Yeah,
we'll
and
see.
doesn't completely undo your sense of reality. So that would be good.
That I could live with. I think that I could handle
I
at
think
this
actually
point.
we've been doing that on a monthly basis.
Yeah, frankly,
With
if
the
it's another
news.
one of those big shifts, I'm like, yeah, whatever. Turns out everything I knew was wrong. Meh, no big deal. But yeah, it's certainly something. Now, given that you actually completed something during this special period that we're living in, do you feel like you're making progress or achieving a sort of balance when
I
it comes
am.
to work, family, and art?
Yeah, no.
No, okay.
I am finding it, I'm a workhorse for 30 years in one form or another. I've just been writing steadily and producing things. And, this little respite we have here has definitely thrown me for a loop. I have to force myself to it. And for the first time in a long time, I'm not working on a novel right now. So I'm hoping to get back to that deep focus. I do feel that my ability to focus on the short stories that I have there has gotten a bit deeper. Perhaps it's the acceptance of a new reality. Perhaps it's like the imminent danger that we all felt in the prior administration of everything just changing forever has lessened a bit. There are definitely enormous problems that need solving, but there's not that sort of basic fear that I think everyone was in this country was feeling in October, November. That fervor isn't there. So I am hoping to sort of, be open to the next thing that comes along. But in the meantime, I'm still plugging away at the short stories.
And did a family solstice give you I hesitate to use the term catharsis, but a sense of closure about the house?
Oh, it was nice. What's really fun about it is, I did like describing it, and I did like going back in and sort of describing it more deeply. But also, when it launched, my editor, Kate Jones at Omnium Gatherum Media, which is an independent horror press based in Los Angeles, and she created a world on Kitely, which is sort of a semi-Second Life space. And she asked if I wanted to hold a virtual launch in a house that looked like the house. Well, my husband's a 3D artist, and he got very excited about this idea because he pretty much, in a way, grew up in the same house I did. He loves it as much as I do. And he created it in 3D, and Kate took it into that space and furnished it. And she made the kitchen like the kitchen that I grew up in, kind of. I mean, it was a lot bigger. And I was allowed to reach out to 20 friends, and I had to reach out to 20 friends who I knew would be willing to go through the hour process of installing the software, creating an avatar, and I wouldn't feel put out by that. And in the end, I think we only had 12 or 15 who made it in to the event, but Co managed to Zoom a bunch of other people in, and we figured this out the last day. Actually, he had an idea the week before. I'm sometimes slow to adapt to stuff, and he invited a bunch of people who live in Middletown and know the house to come along with, and it ended up being a really fabulous event. And it was such a trip walking into this 3D house. And even though the furniture was different because my editor had put it there, she had not been in the house, there were so many things that just rang bells for what that was. And it ended up being I don't know, it was like a nice revisiting of the house. The house is still there. It's been completely refurbished inside, so it doesn't really resemble the same house anymore. But this was a way to sort of go back to it. And I sent some family pictures to Kate, and she put them up around the wall. And the stained glass that was at the top of my parents' stairs were still there. There's actually a picture of a ReaderCon luncheon on the wall of that virtual house that has, Ellen Datlow and Matt Kressel and a bunch of other folks sitting around the living room, which is really fun. So yeah, in a way, it did bring a bit of closure for the house because the house sort of lives on in its own way.
And do you see the virtual launch or the virtual tour, I know it's not the same thing as going to a bookstore and sitting down and reading with listeners and selling books on the spot. But do you find it something you would adjust to, or at least something that well, if we can't do it, we'll go with this.
One thing, I've had a number of friends coming out with books in this virtual world. There are some definite benefits. One is that they can do a book tour without leaving their living room, which is really handy. And also they've been able to reach out to local bookstores in other cities, which I have not done yet. It's a little different with a novella from a novel. But also, for instance, I had a launch that I would have done on campus at Antioch University, which is where I teach. And I went, and it's just such a lovely room of people. And usually there are about 50, 60 people, and there are snacks, and wine, and people hang out. And we had a virtual version of that. It's called Literary Uprising. And that was really, it felt almost like a mimic of the real thing. And also, I think a good 92 people were able to come. And some of our alumni who had moved away were able to tune in from Texas and other places. So that part's nice. You do get more people there. I miss the live space, but I also don't miss the worry of will enough people show up. That's why I prefer group readings instead of just individual readings. And I did notice, I had a friend who had a launch at Book Soup, which is a really awesome independent bookstore on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood. And that space only really fits about 13 people. You can fit 30 if they're all standing around at the back. But for her event, I think she had close to 200 people come. So as far as selling books, it may end up working better. I don't know. Someone would have to show you the metrics on that.
Yeah, I did a virtual version of my trade association's conference this past December, and it was actually the reverse problem. I bought a Zoom webinar license for up to 100 attendees, because if you go from 100 to 500, it becomes a much more pricey thing. And I just figured, let me just do the 100 license. And once I started the sessions, I was just keeping an eye on the participant number. When it got to the mid 80s, I'm like, oh God, don't get to 100. People are going to start getting locked out. I'm going to have to upgrade it on the fly. And, luckily it never quite exceeded 100 people. But, I worry about being too successful, because if there's anything I can sabotage, it's myself. Really. That's
well, and people are much more apt to come if it just involves dialing up. There's always a thing in Los Angeles, which is that people really like their homes. And so sometimes if it's a cold night, or it's rainy, or even the reverse, if it's just a beautiful night and folks don't want to be cooped up, there'll just be no shows for an event. Yeah. So it's nice. This I think allows more people to come.
It's like Dodgers games where they show up in the third inning and leave by the seventh, which we joked was also going to be the case with the vaccinations at the Dodger Stadium. The people would show up late for their appointments and leave early. But because LA,
Yeah. Wow.
Have you figured out your best Zoom angle at this point?
Or it's very funny. Yeah. And I'm it's funny because I have to choose optics, but I choose privacy over optics, because when my daughter was home, I would teach from the dining table, and it looks absolutely fabulous there, and the lighting looks great. But I disturb people, trying to walk through or live in our house, because our dining room is basically part of our living room. It's just the central room of the house. And so I'm in her room, and it's a little bit more echoey. I tried to put up a towel to cut down on that for this session. And the lighting is not that great, especially during the day. But yeah, it's definitely a thing to think about. What I do like is that I have a really crappy camera, so that I end up looking a little less aged than I actually am.
Nice. I had a Today Show appearance. Luckily, it'll never air. They taped it half an hour before the insurrection. So, anything they were going to use basically got put on the back burner. But I actually turned my desk 90 degrees and loaded my bookshelves behind me with all sorts of comics and other weird shit, just figuring if they actually air this, I want viewers to just what the hell does that guy have on his show? Like, all they're going to see is pharma and biopharma outsourcing. And then it's going to be like the ancient Greeks on one side and Tom Tomorrow's, Sparky the Penguin on the other. And yeah, just hoping to God they were going to include that and not crop it all. But,
My brother works for the Financial Times, and he turned me on to Room Rater, which is on Twitter. I love that. It just cracks me up. So
that was my hope.
Yeah, dressing for Room Rater.
I was going to get called into, just get memed somehow with all this. Like, why would this guy have that stuff? But yeah, that's, I was just hoping to give some publicity to some of these cartoonists.
But then Insurrection.
Yeah, literally we finished at 12:30 Eastern time that day. And I thought, oh, thank God. Okay, it's all over. My first national TV thing. I'm done. I can relax. Let me turn on the TV and, oh my God, the world's ending. It just... It was one of those, like, well, I guess that's not going to air tomorrow. So, yeah, I don't know if they're ever planning on using it, but, at least I got in the experience. I figure.
So much of the what next for the Year of the Rat was pretty astonishing.
And now we're in the Ox. So
finally, we can call this New Year now.
Okay, yeah, because I realized when I was sending out my work newsletter on Friday that I forgot to put in a Lunar New Year notice to any of my Chinese readers. But, I figure they won't be getting it until the following Monday when they all check into work again. So
yeah, I don't think they'll mind.
Yeah. Anyway, reading Shirley Jackson Awards. Are you doing
not
other?
This year.
No?
I have taken the year off. It got a bit overwhelming last year. And I think it's wonderful. I did it for 2 years and I may go back around. And one of my favorite fellow readers from the first time I served on the jury, Chikotili Amelamadu, is now reading this year. So I sort of have been trying to catch up with her. But yeah, I'm reading for pleasure now, which is kind of exciting. So
and
aside
what are you reading?
let me see. I'm in the middle of, actually, this is pretty funny. I read it for the Shirley Jacksons last year, The Ninth House, by Leigh Bardugo. And I assigned it to my novel class because it is a real look at structure, different points of view, and also casually admitting paranormal activity or magic into a very real setting. It's a horror novel set at Yale University. So that one's really good. I'm also reading Matthew Salisi's new book, Craft in the Real World, which is about workshop and workshopping and the challenges basically of the 20th century structure of workshop on today's writers and how it actually manages to silence people of color sitting in a workshop with a bunch of white folks who and how to maybe restructure that. I haven't gotten far enough to find out what his theories are, but he's such a marvelous writer about writing. So that one's really good. I don't know. I have a stack. Sarah Langen's new book. I have on the stack as well, but it's a lot of fun to sort of, I really enjoyed the Shirley Jacksons, especially as the quarantine started. It forced me to keep reading because reading was really challenging for all of us during that time.
God, yeah.
Yeah.
I keep that spreadsheet of every book I finished and with a date on it. And there is maybe the longest lag. It's only about a month or so, but the longest lag in between finished books in like the 20 or 30 years I've been keeping this thing. I'm like, it was like I think it was about 6 weeks from the time I finished one to the time I was finally able to read something else. And that was only because Matt Ruff is the most propulsive narrative storyteller there is. Cause the book I was stuck in for so long, I was like, let me just pick up Matt's novel. And like 2 hours later, I'd already blown through 150 pages and thought, oh, thank God. Okay. I can read. I just need to read something a little different than what I was trying to read.
Yeah, and something kind of immersive. I really liked my friend Andromeda Romano Lax. I had 3 friends come out with books on the same day. I was like, how do I even? But I got arcs of her book because our books were released about 4 days from each other. And she's a colleague from Antioch. And she wrote a book called Annie and the Wolves, which is a novel centering on a historian who's studying Annie Oakley's journals, but who is also dealing with her sister's suicide and living back home and her own trauma. And it ends up dealing with, apparently Annie Oakley was held captive and molested for a number of years in her childhood. And Andromeda was dealing with the fact that she found out her sisters had been molested for much of her childhood. But what results is this completely unique, semi-paranormal book that's totally immersive and deals with time travel, the concept of vengeance around abuse, and it's just a real mind-blowing one. It's really fabulous.
I am writing all these down because, God forbid I only do the reading for the podcast guests. I should always have, extracurricular stuff too. That's what I was sort of wondering when you mentioned not reading for the Shirley Jacksons and reading for pleasure. I'm like, yeah, I understand that concept. It's been a long time since I've been able to just, read for myself for some fun, but.
Yeah, and I also read for my students. So,
right.
Because I'll assign in both of my novel classes, we'll go through a novel. I had the good sense to assign the same novel to both classes. Because before I would look up and suddenly it was week 6 and we were going to do an in-depth discussion of something. So, and Sarah Langen's is Good Neighbors. It's meant to be just absolutely brilliant. That is my very next thing to read once I'm through the Bardugo again.
And how much of teaching is right now? I mean, teaching versus, I don't want to say coaching, but I guess like counseling the students.
With my college students, although Antioch is a BA completion program, it's a lot of people in their early 20s, and they are going through this in a very different way from the way we are. And so the insurrection really, it definitely got to a bunch of us, but their entire reality of everything that they thought was real has just completely shifted. And it's very terrifying. So there is a little bit of that. And I was extra forgiving of, the election week, when things were due and they were not necessarily handed in, because I know everybody was dealing with a lot more than just, finishing a paper. But with my novel class, it ends up being sort of really useful for me because everybody does talk about how every week it's a bit challenging to focus on, the fictional world, and how their work is going. And so in that sense, it ends up being sort of, counseling for me as well. And again, if, some of them are, dealing with, complete unemployment, which is, terrifying, or they're dealing with full-time jobs and trying to stay afloat and writing and following the news. It's just very encouraging. It feels more like a community than it does sort of, me holding their hands.
Yeah, and that's what I was sort of wondering, that sense of give and take in that respect, because I know activism and community building is such a big part of your life. So that question of what it's like when it all has to be virtual. I guess the question is, what have you learned in that respect? What's the past year taught you?
Yeah, I don't know yet. It's very funny because, I have friends who are able to continue their activism and finding ways to really help in communities what needs help now. And I know that the moment I'm vaccinated, I want to probably just volunteer at LA Food Bank because eviction, unemployment, and homelessness are going to be huge issues facing the city in the coming times. And I'm probably going to offer myself practically until I can figure out how to be of service in a job way to sort of, help the city into the next iteration, because the after is going to be, it's going to be a whole different animal as well. I feel somewhat stymied right now, which is, terrible, because I do have friends who are physically making sandwiches for certain organizations and figuring that piece out. And that's a piece that I need to work on.
Do you wonder what your mother would have made of this situation, either in terms of how she dealt with it or how she worked it into art?
Yeah, I have no idea. I think all of this has stunned all of us sort of beyond belief. And also, the question would be which age version of my mother,
Sure.
I know that, this is someone who's scrapped through, power outages where there was no heat in the house. She and my dad got miner's lights, and were having a fire in the fireplace to stay warm. And this was, I think, when they were in their early 80s. So then they finally bought a generator. But I do miss her, because there is that sense of like, who do you turn to just at least say, holy crap, this is just like terrible, what's going on? And she would definitely be my first phone call. But yeah, a lot of people have asked that. It's like, what would she make of it in her writing and stuff? And I think there's a part of all of us writing things that are supernatural or in any kind of genre are kind of like, I have no idea.
Yeah. Do you revisit your parents' work since they've been gone?
I have not. And that's funny. That was in our first conversation together a couple of reader cons ago. You asked, my mom's voice is really, really strong in her books. Mm-hmm. And I have not, outside of, there are 2 stories of hers I teach, but they were written in the 50s. So they feel sort of like safely distant. One is The New You, which is a really marvelous tale that kind of is evergreen. A woman who writes away for the new you to make herself fresh for her husband. And it turns out to be an alternate version of her that's very stunning and absolutely perfect in the 50s sense, but it's still, resonates now. What's funny is I've seen that story sort of, cribbed or nodded to in various like Black Mirrors or in movies and such, because it turns out that the old version of her is living in the closet eating Malamars. And the husband actually has started hanging out with the old version of her because he likes it better. So anyway, but aside from like stories that are really, stayed, I haven't gone back there.
Mm-hmm. And when you talked about the BLM aspect of things, did you go out and protest?
That was a hard one because I've always taken the kids to protest. We were at the first women's march here and stuff, but the fear of the virus went out on that one. We donated to local causes. My daughter and I brought a bunch of snacks to BLM Pasadena because they were going to have a gathering there. And so I helped in ways that I could, but the idea of the virus and, imperiling folks in the family just kind of outbid that. And I absolutely admire folks who were out there demonstrating. It is a hard one.
Yeah. Oh, trust me. I mean, I in full support, but I'm like, I can't go out there just on the off chance anything happens. And then I have to go deal with my father, who's in his mid 80s and in horrible health.
Yeah. The ripple effect of one getting sick is also pretty terrifying. Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, it's been great not seeing my father. It's been months and months and months, and I get together. The only time I see him is when I have to take him out for like blood panels or tests or something. But otherwise, we have an excuse not to see each other now, where before we'd have to come up with, some sort of rationale to stay away from each other. So
I know a lot of people for whom the holidays just were wonderful because they did not have to cope with all of the family dynamics that they had to for years.
Yeah. It was a great Thanksgiving. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
We felt bad because we couldn't get down. My wife's family is all from rural Louisiana. And, early on, when things were clearly serious, I'm like, are you okay with us not going? She's like, oh my God, of course we're not going. I'm like, oh, thank God. Okay. Yeah, I know it's important to you to be around your family. She's like, no, it's a death sentence if we do that. I'm like, good. Okay. Glad we're on the same page and don't have to hem and haw about, maybe we could risk this or that. But yeah,
it becomes logistically exhausting. And the holidays are what has killed just way too many Los Angeles folks. The numbers spiked after Thanksgiving and just continued to go up until only just a couple of weeks ago. So, yeah, not a bad thing.
Do you feel like you've learned something about individual people in your life that you didn't know before? I ask in the post-Holocaust sort of way, like wow, I did not think this person was going to be the sort of person who would put my life at risk and my family's life at risk, or, vice versa, that I didn't think this person would turn into Howard Hughes given, the situation and completely vanish.
I think I've found, and it's funny because I think the amplification of inconsiderate folks because of politics and, folks not caring about the virus and anti-maskers and all the stuff that makes me crazy showed me that I have picked some really excellent friends in my life. And most of my friends are incredibly cautious and conscientious people. And I in that way, yeah. And I do have, everybody I know is losing people right now, especially here. And in the writing community, we have a friend who's on his 12th day on a ventilator now. And he was this hale, hardy 40-year-old biking up mountains guy. And he picked it up at the supermarket. So now we enter the scary part of even people staying at home as much as they can or sort of getting sick. So it's crazy.
California, especially Southern California, has been nightmarish. I mean, we talk about how New York, New Jersey, out here, we kind of gave everybody a roadmap, but it just, as horrific as April and May were for us, we didn't think it would be like this all the way across the country. And it's like, wow.
I know. Yeah. And I thought maybe the distance that people can get here, the fact that also people
the lack
can
of
be
density. Yeah.
Outdoors, I thought for some reason, I guess that was hubris, it's just crazy times.
So what do you want to write?
Oh gosh, I don't even know. I want to keep going at the short stories. I'm really enjoying them. I had my first Asimov's publication in October, which was, it was November, December, I think. Yeah, the Christmas issue. So that was really exciting. I think because it's a controllable space, and I do have 2 novels that will be going out to market. So so I want to sort of focus on the short stories, and it's something I can do. And I think that it's sort of polishing skills that I was getting a little rusty on. So that part's good. As far as the next great big book calling, I'm not sure. I spent 5 years working on this novel that's the portrait of a marriage told through the lens of Alzheimer's. And it took a lot out of me. My mom died of brain cancer, and my dad had Alzheimer's. So it was a really personal, put everything into a novel. So short stories are a nice sort of breather in this in-between time. So I'm not sure. Maybe the next novel will make itself apparent to me as things sort of give us a more breathing space mentally. But we shall see.
Again, no writer ever likes to answer, what I'm working on next. But I always feel like throwing it at them just in case they want to jinx themselves and curse their next project.
Have you not heard? I'm going to write the great American novel.
And I got told this very early on by a seasoned writer, Gil, never ask us about what you're working on next. Although I did that with yesterday's guest, who's going to air the week after yours, who unwittingly answered everything, but it turns out she's in academia, so you sort of have to tell your board what the next book is. So she felt that's, don't worry, I've already had to make this pitch. I'm like, I know you think that, but you don't understand how curses work. So yeah, we'll see if that ends up.
I think it varies from writer to writer. My mom always said when you ask a writer about their writing, it's like asking about their sex life. So I think she played things close to the vest. I'm usually relatively happy to talk about what it is that I am working on. This is definitely a period where I've never been so stymied by the question.
I could ask about your sex life instead, but I'm just kidding. But again, the pandemic, it's a different sort of world when you're seeing the same people again and again and again. But,
yeah.
It's really been a strange year. Good God.
It has. I really miss folks. The virtual event that I had at Antioch it felt like the room. I had friends screaming in the chat as they would in the back, Kay, I had some classmates show up. It felt like a very warm room, only, it was very much not it. And I missed sort of, hugging everybody in the conversations after. So it is a funny space we are in. I am looking forward to the after. It's funny because I've been having anxiety dreams about, I'll be out in a crowd and then suddenly realize nobody's wearing a mask and neither am I, and I'm doomed. And the other day I had a dream where I was out at a food festival in Los Angeles, and it was absolutely filled with people. And I realized I was in a dream because nobody was wearing masks. And my daughter had said that day, because she's studying psychology, that apparently any faces you see in dreams you've seen before. Your brain cannot construct a new face. Yeah. And so I realized I was in a dream, and I got kind of excited, and I said, you know what? I'm going to walk around and look. And I started walking up to people and looking in their faces. So I don't know if that means,
I have to tell you, it's a difference between our lives. And I'm assuming this means you get out more than I do, because I have had maybe 2 or 3 dreams total that had any pandemic connotation to them.
Oh, wow.
Like, I don't dream about this situation at all. No, there's never mask anxiety. There is no, like, occasionally I'll be somewhere that I've traveled and I'll have that moment of, but how did I get there? We're not supposed to be able to fly. And like, that's the extent of how this has permeated my subconscious. Presumably it's sublimating in all sorts of other crazy ways in there, but there's no explicit pandemic in my dreams. And I started asking a couple of friends who live similarly isolated like I do. And they're like, yeah, it's the same thing. And then friends who live in New York and still have to get out and do stuff. Every single dream is like shoving somebody onto a subway track because they're not wearing a mask. It's totally, part of their...
The mask anxiety is real. And I think it's even realer in Los Angeles. I was really astonished when I took my daughter to college. We ended up on the Upper West Side. And that's always a trip, to be forced to travel during the pandemic and to realize, oh shit, it's everywhere. There's a part of you that thinks New York will stay New York. And I went and I was like, no, but they were much better at masks. I'm absolutely astonished by the number of people in Los Angeles not wearing masks.
I think, so honestly,
the anxiety is real.
What we went through last spring, like Amy and I went out for the first time in a long time to just we went to a bookstore about 40 minutes from here last weekend, and then just walked around the sidewalk in town for a while because we hadn't gone anywhere in so long. Everybody masked up. And I was walking around like, okay, this is nice. There's no one asshole with the mask down below his nose or on his chin. Everyone took care of it. Now, affluent northern New Jersey, town, etc. But there was that sense of, if I had to deal with this on a daily basis, I'm sure this would creep into my subconscious. But
yeah, probably.
Yeah, the fact that I'm just hiding here every single day, as I call it, unleashing my inner cartoonist, where I just don't go out and don't see anyone anyway. Because most cartoonists I talk to are like, this isn't that different than my day-to-day life before. I never went out. My wife went out and did stuff, and I just hide here. So yeah, there's that difference. And
I know a lot of writers who, it hasn't changed much, and they're actually quite productive. So it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. But as far as the dream life goes, yeah, that's something that I've been pondering with people as to how much this permeates who they are and whether they're going to be able to escape it at some point down the line.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll be having dreams of this era 5-10 years hence. Yeah. When God willing, it will have passed.
Yeah, that's also the great unknown. And I'm not revealing anything, but related to the day job stuff that I do, still nobody's quite sure if this is something we're going to have to deal with annually, every couple of years, in terms of vaccinating everybody and trying to stay up to speed. But as it is, I'm supposed to have a big trade show in Milan in November. And just a couple of the companies I represent are thinking we're all going to be there.
Wow.
And I'm like, no, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think November. The math on this has been, we remember the math in, I think it was March, where it's like, if we all shut down for 2 months, it'll all be over.
Remember, the cure would be worse than the disease. That's what they told us again and again and again.
Yeah.
So now we know. But anyway, but you're happy with Family Solstice?
I have to say novellas are quite a delight to write. Yeah. They are very containable, tidy, like going through each sentence and making sure it's doing what you want it to do is much easier. If you change something, it doesn't unravel the whole sweater like novels do. So it was really fun. I mean, I wish they were more, feasible in a marketable, because I would just like sink into doing only novellas. But it was a really joy of a space to dance around in, and it was nice being in the 70s as much as it's a horror story.
The 70s were a horror story in their own way too. So.
Yeah, they were. But it was a nice place to escape to, and I'm very glad that I had gotten it started before the pandemic. I wrote the bulk of it not before the pandemic, before we knew the pandemic was going to completely alter our lives. I wrote the bulk of it last January, when we were still sort of hoping it wouldn't get to our country.
Yeah.
So
trust me, the last business thing I did was February 28th down in DC, and they were, "Oh, Gil, it's not going to be that bad. We're here in Washington. It's we're safe here." I'm like, "No, I live out in the woods, so I'm safe. You guys are all at risk. I'm getting the fuck out of here as soon as we're done with these meetings because I don't want to be around everybody coming from everywhere." They didn't even understand that half of our meetings were canceled because of intelligence hearings and congressmen who had to get shuffled out to more COVID related hearings that they were then going to get better trade on. But
that
it was
time was funny. I went to AWP in San Antonio, and it was probably about half the size. And there was a lot of debate on whether or not to go and continue. And I had a couple of commitments, so I decided to go. I'm very glad I did, but I realized it was probably completely foolhardy in retrospect.
It's all that stuff we just didn't realize until, afterwards. And oh my God, the risks we undertook, not quite understanding what the risks were.
I mean, I wore a mask when I flew. I was super cautious about my hands. I wasn't too close to folks, but still, even then, it wasn't, I didn't wear a mask around the event or anything.
Yeah, because it's safe there. I'm just not going to shake hands with people. Do you remember the last time you hugged somebody who wasn't
outside the family? Yeah. That was the last time I was in public, was AWP. And I was very glad that I got to see some really dear friends from Los Angeles, and we had some solid hanging around time. It seems to be the last good time that I hang on to. That and a Dirty Laundry Lit that launched Bridget Bianca's book at the Virgil Bar in Hollywood, and Natasha Dion runs that reading series. That room was packed. It was a joyful event. There was brilliant poetry. I was really glad that I dragged my husband to that one, because I think I will be going back to that packed bar in my head until we can go back to packed events.
Yeah, I got hugged by a nurse December 30th. I took my old man into the ER, and when I wheeled him out, he came out a couple days later. He was fine, but the admitting nurse, I was like, so if something's seriously wrong, I'm not going to see him again, right? She just like walked out of the reception area to give me a hug. I'm like, that's the first human contact I've had with someone besides my wife since March. So
wow,
weird.
That must have been trippy. Did you feel unsafe?
No, I mean, she literally like gowned up, mask, plastic face guard, and everything else. She was also this big round woman. So it was just this different sort of build, and she just had the arms out. I'm like, I guess I'm supposed to do that? Sure. I mean, I was masked up too, but it was just this weird.
And hugs are actually the safest. I mean, it's safer than handshakes because it's just the breathing of air. But that's so trippy. I sometimes run around and drop things off on people's porches. I'll make a bunch of lemon curd or bake some stuff. And I'm very comfortable talking to folks like in this situation or in Zoom. But when I saw my friend and she was on her front porch and we were safely distanced, I realized I had lost the art of face-to-face conversation.
Yeah, it's weird,
I
right?
have never felt so awkward. This is a dear friend who, I text regularly, and I suddenly was like taken aback. Yeah.
Yeah. I was at a friend's father's viewing after he died, and I was his oldest friend that I have, and I'm standing there in a face mask trying to tell him, I'm sorry about your father. He was always good, in our life, and he raised some great kids. And I'm like, none of this is working because he can't see anything of my face. I was like, John Eric, we'll talk after this. Let me just, I was also freaked out by being in an enclosed area surrounded by a bunch of people. But yeah, just trying to have a face-to-face conversation while we're all masked up was just just not working for me. But
yeah, it's very, because we've been super, aside my son and I go to the supermarket once a week. That's our thing. And now we've actually cut down to delivery because of this new strain. Seeing folks around is kind of odd. It's funny, we scuttle across the street from each other if we're out walking these days, right? I mean, it's just a different dynamic. Yeah. And in LA, people always said hello, like no matter what neighborhood you were in, if you pass people and you're walking, you sort of nod to each other or say hi. And that is definitely different now.
Yeah. And you got to be demonstrative with any facial expression, use your eyes and everything else, because no one can see
waggle the
face.
eyebrows.
Which I can't do with this giant amount of hair covering everything else. But yeah, we
were laughing, because in Zoom, it takes a while for people's audio to click in. And so people wave at the beginning of a meeting, and we kind of wondered if that's going to carry over into real meetings.
Yeah. We're all going to be doing jazz hands waving. Oh, let me ask the Great Family Solstice question. What was the toughest part of recollecting the 70s for you? When we talk about the 70s being a horror story in and of itself.
You know what actually became useful was there's a part where and this is not a spoiler, the main character wakes up to the generational racism of simply, being white and this inheritance, and her family specifically. And she says, wait, this is Sesame Street. This is the world of Free to Be You and Me. This is, all those 70s indicators of loving, awake society. And that was actually a good touchstone for me, because I grew up in on a university campus with a diversity of friends, and also my public school was very diverse, and so I was in a bubble of absolute unconsciousness, not believing that racism was something that happened in the South. Which was,
I know, stereotypical in and of itself.
Talk to any of my Black friends from the North, they're like, please, really? So that was an interesting touchstone to my own, complete myopia at the time. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, just recalling the 70s, trying to evoke that era.
It was easy because
for readers.
It is an era of, I was 13 in 1980, so it is an era of the era I grew up in and the ideals I grew up with, for sure. And I went to my first sit-in at age 2 because my babysitter took me to sit in at the university presidents to demonstrate against Cambodia. So that sort of rebellious atmosphere was in the air. So that was fun to access.
And final question, which gets back to pandemic-y stuff. Where do you want to go when it's safe to go
I
somewhere?
want to drive all over this big ass country and just hug everyone I know. I'll just be pulling up to their front porch and take them in a death grip. I swear. I know we all want to travel. I really want to go back to Japan, but I think my first goal is in a way, just local, not local, it'll be East Coast. It'll be middle of the country. That's one thing that I just want to see friends again. That's the goal. Granted, there are some friends I see more now, and my friend, Gerald, works in Scotland, and we now sort of every couple months check in via Zoom, and we had never done that before the pandemic. But, that's been
a funny thing. The things we're going to, the good stuff to come out of this, I guess. Things like that where we realize, we can actually be in contact with, you and I can do this, where otherwise we would have had to wait until, there was an in-person opportunity. Yeah.
Right.
I'll be honest. Yeah. That's the only time we'd get together. But yeah, it's weird.
Aside from, I really want to share food with people. That's one thing I really miss doing. Or, bringing them somewhere fabulous to eat. But, aside from that, it is nice to sort of touch base with friends. I'm definitely much more in touch with friends than I had been before, I think.
Yeah. Whereas I still avoid everybody unless it's a podcast scenario because, I know no other way to communicate with human beings. So no, that's not true. I have a few friends who actually go out of their way to call or occasionally do something like this. But But yeah, it's
we had gotten pretty good at the distance visit for a while. It's just the numbers got so scary here that everybody stopped that. But for a while, it was very nice to go stand on people's front lawns and wave at them.
Yeah. I had to do that yesterday with a neighbor. They accidental mail delivery, something that looked like some sort of fancy wedding invitation or something. My house is number 10. Theirs is number 40. The mailman had just misread the label and dropped it on me. I was like, it's Saturday. If they've already grabbed their mail, they're not going to see this until Monday. They probably want whatever this is now. I'll walk over. And then I was like, I don't have a mask. I'm going to have to put this on their front doorstep because they'd already checked their mail, ring the doorbell. Yeah, stand back like 10 or 15 feet and explain, misdelivered, blah, blah, blah. And the guy's a cop. I happen to know which house it was. So I was like, okay, I don't want him coming out with a gun. So, I'll just stand at a distance, take off the sunglasses, although I still have this horrible hair and everything to scare people with. But yeah, that was the closest I've come to talking to anybody for quite a while. But.
We have many, many masks at the ready because, we even step out front. We've got to wear one because our houses are very close together. And, yeah.
And that's my thing. It's of a piece with my not having dreams about this stuff is that I literally forget to grab a mask. I keep a couple in the car, but I'm like, oh, I don't go out often enough for this to have become anything I do regularly. So, yeah. And
I forget sometimes. Sometimes we'll have like a very ordinary day. I don't know what it is. It feels extra Sunday-y or something. And I'll step up front and I remember I was walking up the street and I was irate that there was someone without a mask. And then I realized I wasn't wearing one. Oh. I became a little more forgiving of people who might have forgotten.
See, all of this sounds like it's going to be fodder for stories for you.
Oh gosh, forever. Yeah.
I'm figuring you'll get something good out of this, whether it's people who put on masks and they never come off or, people who don't have anything underneath. But
my daughter has already declared that, if her kids ever complain that they're bored, she's just going to read them the Riot Act. Are you kidding? You could go see Friends. You could go trip the light fantastic,
When I was young.
Yeah, exactly. This is what this pandemic has done. It's made my children old people already.
I was 40 at the age of 14, so I'm fine with all this. But anyway, I enjoyed the hell out of Family Solstice. Like I said, I'm just, again, still terrified that whatever's in the attic is similar to what was in the basement in your piece.
I certainly hope not. You're going to have to, I think you'll have to ask your family.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I figure we're first generation Americans, so it's really the opposite of not giving anything away. What goes on in your book, but still, yeah, I'm living in dread. So if this episode never airs, just remember I actually went up to the attic at some point to find out what was up there. Okay,
we will send a party after you.
Awesome, Kate. Thanks for coming on, and I just hope to God we get together in person. I know, soon.
We will. I'm hoping, I have big hopes for the Roaring 20s in 2022. It's going to be one big party.
And that was Kate Maruyama. Her new novella is Family Solstice from Omnium Gatherum. Order it from your favorite bookstore. I will have purchase links in the show and episode notes for this one, both to Bookshop and to Omnium Gatherum's website. Family Solstice is a creepy, creepy story building to a pretty frightening crescendo that maybe I'd have found less creepy if not for whatever it is in my attic, which, as an update, by the way, I forgot to turn the light on in the attic last night, but the thing didn't get up and move around. So that's something. Anyway, you should definitely give Family Solstice a read. And you should also check out Kate's website, katemaruyama.wordpress.com, for more on her writing, activism, classes, editing services, media appearances, and more. She's also on Twitter and Instagram as Kate Maruyama, and that's all one word, spelled the same way throughout, KateMaruyama. Oh, and I'll have a link to the video tour of the virtual house that Kate talked about for the book launch. That'll be in the show notes for this one. Now, in the before time, this is when I would ask for support via my Patreon or PayPal for the podcast. But nowadays, I would like to just get support in the form of postcards, letters, or a phone call to the Google Voice account that I have, where I record a message from you and maybe use it in the show down the line. That number is 973 869-9659. And you can call that, let me know what you like and don't like about the show, who you want to hear me record with, and anything else, things you want me to tell listeners about, TV, movies, music, whatever. But as far as supporting the show, just do it with your emotional and verbal support. If you do have money or resources to spare, I hope you would put that towards food banks, freedom funds, other institutions, and ways of achieving some degree of justice in this world. You could also donate to people's individual Kickstarters, Indiegogos, GoFundMes, Patreons. Just show people some support if you've got the resources to spare, because, it's a world where, it really helps to lend a hand. Meanwhile, I still have a few copies left of the very first issue of my very first zine, Haiku for Business Travelers. It's free. If you want one, just send me your address and I will mail it out to you. If you want to give me a couple of bucks for printing and postage and all that, feel free. You can do that through PayPal, but really, this isn't a money-making thing. It's just me sharing my art, my avocation, as we talked about at the beginning of the show. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY, the number 4, TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.